And ladies and gentlemen, this is the Voice of Reason podcast. Did I just lose everything at the drop of a hat? Maybe not. I hope Travis Kirkendall comes into the picture here. Maybe he does. There's Travis Kirkendall.
Hey, I'm back.
There you
We're still
go.
alive?
Yes, we're still live. I was like,
Okay.
what
Okay.
happened? We just went live just for a second, and boom, he was gone. My name is Andy Van Beber. This is Travis Kirkendall. We are two of the three musketeers that make up the Voice of Reason. Our brother Sean is not with us tonight. He will be with us next week. And so tonight, again, it is just Travis and I who hold down the ship, but that's okay. We're okay to hold down the ship. I'm becoming comfortable with steering. I'm not as I don't have as many I have plenty of coarse jokes. I just don't have the what do you want to call it, the
You could be a host. You got the voice for it. You got the
he's got, but Sean has the radio voice. And I'm
well. Sean's a natural showman.
he is.
He's the guy. He can get up on stage. He can do all these things. That's why he's living where he's at, doing what he's doing. That's what he's good at. He's that's his thing.
I know, and every time that he's not on, I'm just like, but you
And you and I get on here all awkward, like
go,
what are we gonna talk about? Yeah.
oh my gosh, it is.
We try.
It is. Sean, see, I haven't even said today's date. Today is January the 23rd, 2023. We are in episode number 43, creeping ever so much closer, 5 weeks away from episode 100 of the Voice of Reason podcast. And we have, that makes me nervous because we have to get on the ball and actually, plan something special for that. I don't know. We need to talk to our friends out at McDinger's or something and plan something special for that. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be cool. I can make it back. I know when I was talking to, I'll say it. When I was talking to Sean, it sounded like he's going to be in town in a couple of months. So maybe we can plan something.
Oh man, that would be fantastic for us to all sit around the same table at a time. But anyway, so the weekend for me was interesting. I was just telling Travis before, I have been soccer dad, I have been basketball dad, and now I am swim dad. Yes, folks. Bryson decided he didn't want to play basketball anymore, which was fine. But we went into the realm, dived into the realm, headlong into the swim realm. And, wow, I was telling Travis before we went on tonight that those kids, I want to tell you something. I've seen athletes. I've coached track for 20 years. I've seen all kinds of athletes. I coached basketball for 15 years. I've coached, and I even coached softball for 2 years, and I've seen all kinds of athletes. But the swimmer is by far and large one of the best. When you get these, and I saw a lot of high school swimmers, and they're specimens. I mean, these kids are, cut. They are lean. They are fast. I mean, these kids are in shape, and I was really impressed. But we did our first swim meet, and that was impressive. We had a good time. Bryson, he it's going to be a work in progress. He seems to like it, so we're happy with that. But we did that. That was all day yesterday, and it was definitely 7 hours. Of course, when you do like a high school track meet or a junior high track meet, you're only like 2 age levels. With a swim meet, you're doing basically ages 4 to 19. All in one meet. And so, but hats off to Hannibal YMCA. They put on a really good meet yesterday. Hats off to Twin Pike Family YMCA, Joe McLaughlin, Wendy McLaughlin. Great swim program that they have in place, and took my son right in, and I was really happy with it. So,
That's
uh,
awesome. I'm glad they got a program like that there in Pike County,
yeah,
man. But swimming is so underrated. Like I encourage people if you've never went to like a lap pool and tried to swim some laps, like I'll swim. I actually do swimming here and there, and just doing 2 laps of freestyle, I am absolutely smoked. Like I am just drained. It is so challenging. It's such a technical sport too. Like every movement
oh yeah,
matters in the
every
pool.
yes,
It's like form is so important and there's such attention to detail to it. But really cool that your son's doing it, man.
yeah,
That's pretty cool.
and that's the, just watching these kids. You watch the, I mean, when you see it on TV and you watch it in the Olympics, it's one thing. But not to brag on the coach's daughter. She's a freshman, and this girl is a phenomenal swimmer. And I've never been able to witness someone. I mean, I've coached some great runners in track that have dominated the sport, um, and who I've seen it a couple times on the track. But to see it in person in a pool, and this girl finishing 10 to 15 seconds ahead of her next competitor was just, I was just like, and just takes off. And it's like I said, it's something to behold. It's really something to behold. How was your weekend?
It was busy. So we went back home to see my grandma for her birthday.
And how old is
We drove
grandma?
out.
How old is grandma?
She just turned 78. This is my mom's side of the family. She just
Okay,
turned
okay,
78. This is the my grandmother who has cancer currently.
all right.
So we went home and saw her. We left. I was working late Friday night, so we didn't leave Friday. We left early Saturday morning, so a lot of driving. So we spent the day with them and really just went home, hung out with my dad the rest of the night, and we were back on the road the next morning. And then my dog started training again yesterday, and that went really good.
Yeah,
And he had a fun week, and my dad's got like 30 something acres there in
he
Bowling
was
Green.
running. He was
He's
running
just,
hard, wasn't
oh, it's awesome. He's completely different dog, just so happy
he? Oh man,
and so well behaved too. Like he's just an angel there because he's able to burn all that energy.
that
But it was a good weekend, just busy.
you mentioned training. I busted out. I busted out the electronic training collar for my Golden. I'm at that point where it's time to really buckle down, and I'm let's just say that I'm ready to kick some tail and take some names with this dog. So
My only advice with that, I'm not a professional trainer by any means. Just reward the good behavior as much as you
oh
can
yeah,
with that.
yep. We got the
Really
definitely got the
balance
dog.
that out.
Definitely got the dog treats. So,
Awesome.
but yeah, we do all that. So, but man, what a week it was. If you This kind of crept underneath the radar for me until Travis shared it in our group chat about it's part of a recession. It happens during a recession. We are now, what would we say? Is it safe to say 6 months into this recession? 5, 4 or 5 at
Uh,
least.
uh, I'd say so. That's kind of when the term started to get thrown around
And
more mainstreamish.
yeah, and I mean, so you saw with, I mean, recession. It started out with the inflation. It started out with inflation. We knew this was coming. Not to toot our own horns here at the Voice of Reason, but we called it last year when this legislation of pushing up wages was going to happen, and this was going to push prosperity in our economy. And we had Hank Owens on, and we've had various people on who said this is not going to be good for the economy. This is going to be a bad thing, and here we are. So, um, Travis, why don't you give us a rundown of what we're seeing as far as some of the numbers that have come out in the last couple of weeks, actually in the last month, over the layoffs, especially in the tech sector. Why don't you give us some rundown on that?
Well, a lot of these layoffs that I've been seeing are in the uh, the tech area of the workforce. The reason we even got on this topic is I've been seeing these articles of these big companies doing layoffs, and then I happened to see Alphabet, which is Google,
Right.
laying off 12,000 employees. And I forget what percentage that is of their hiring force, but it's a lot of people. And there was a lot of, I was reading a lot of articles of employees that kind of felt like, they were just kind of hung out to dry and they were kind of just didn't really feel appreciated. I saw one article, a guy, he was 20 years in, just got a raise and promotion, all this stuff. And you're 20 years in a company, you think that's a career.
Right.
You probably got a pension set up and all this stuff. And you just get laid off. Layoffs are hard, man. Um, but I started to really dive into that after I saw that article. And yeah, it's mostly been tech jobs. And I have a whole graph here. I got a bunch of information here. So I guess we'll just dive right into it. Meta, I think according to I got a lot of this stats from Investopedia and a couple of articles as well I was skimming through earlier. So Meta has laid off 13% of their
Jesus.
employee staff. That's 11,000 employees. Peloton, which has just been a disaster of a company, their stock has just been a nightmare.
This is
Uh, they've
that.
totaled
Yeah. This is the
they've
that's
totaled more than 4,600 employees laid off, and that's been a series of layoffs. That's been going on since the beginning of last year.
well that thing
There's been
that
like four different periods.
and that launch of that company didn't even. I mean, like you said, that's been a cluster fudge from the get go on that with that company.
Well, Peloton's issue, and this was kind of the theme with a lot of these tech companies, the pandemic happened, and there was this giant tech boom that came out of
Right.
it.
Right.
And there was I mean, Peloton took off. I mean, everyone, I
Because
remember when
people didn't
people
go
were
to the
talking
gym.
about this stock. Yeah, people weren't going to the gym, but they were buying these bikes and doing the online program. And I mean, it had a lot to offer, but they just had this big rise, and I think they just overextended themselves riding that wave, and then now you see what we have now.
Hmm.
But to continue on, everyone's obviously heard about the Twitter layoffs when Elon Musk bought the company. They've laid off 3,700 people total, and I don't know for sure. I thought I read some there they were talking about laying off more, but who knows with that. Company Seagate Technology announced a restructuring plan, reducing their workforce by 8%. That's 3,000 employees laid off. Carvana, which I believe was on the verge of bankruptcy, I was reading the other
Yeah,
day.
their business model wasn't the smartest either.
No, let go of 12% of its workforce. That's 2,500 employees. That was May 10th. GoPuff, a consumer goods and food delivery company, had four rounds of layoffs, totaled see, there was two layoffs beginning of the year, one of 100 employees and then one of 450 employees.
Hmm.
And then in July, they laid off 1,500 employees. And then in October, 250 employees. Snap, 20% of its workforce, 1,280 employees laid off.
No, no, okay.
Coinbase,
Snap as in Snapchat, or is that Snap as in something different, or is that?
I don't know. I don't know if Snap is Snapchat.
I
It
think
just
I
says
think it.
Snap.
I think that's what it's. I mean,
I would assume that's Snapchat,
yeah,
given
right.
this is tech companies discussing here. Coinbase laid off 18% of its staff, 1,100 people, and I've heard rumors of them not being in a good financial position anyway. There's been talks of bankruptcy with them. It's another thing, public service announcement. Excuse me. If you keep money on Coinbase, find a way to get your money
Get
off
it off there,
Coinbase.
right?
There was a thing that they put out. I remember it was it was around the time the layoffs happened. They put out a memo to people on that website saying that, and if there was for lack of better terms, this document that they put out to the people that keep money was saying that if we happen to go bankrupt, they can seize your funds.
Because it's not your. None of that is. Of course, none of that is is
There's a term in cryptocurrency, not your wallet, not your
right.
crypto.
So it's not protected. It's not like FDIC or SIPC insured.
That too, correct.
So
Um,
you're. I mean,
so
you're pretty much foobarred if Yeah, to me, and that's not even the tip of the iceberg with that.
Yeah, we've there's been a lot of stuff in crypto. And real quick, if you're somebody that does have money on Coinbase and you want to know how to safely get it off, by all means, reach out to me. I can help you out. Stripe, a financial services and software company, um, laid off 14% of its staff, 1,000 people, November 3rd. Actually, there was this minor layoff before that of 50 people, but then they went hard and dropped off 1,000 people. Microsoft, which we heard about recently, I believe that was
That was earlier on, and they knew that was. I
wasn't that
mean,
like 10,000 employees I sent
yes,
to you guys?
yes.
But according to this, the exact numbers are difficult to track. So
Well, and that
I think they're still going through layoffs.
there and what's why is this? I mean, a lot of it. We're knowing that a lot of it is a lot of the tech based stuff is because of, and like you said there at the beginning, the the like you said there at the beginning, it after the let off of COVID and I mean, tech is naturally going to see a. I mean, could you attribute a lot of this to COVID?
I
I
would just
mean,
in the
getting
sense
back to
that
normal.
yeah, I mean, we had a pretty, I mean, between with stimulus and everybody getting out of quarantine, I mean, there's so many factors that went into that boom that happened. And I mean, any company, I mean, it's logical. You start to grow, demand goes up, you need more employees, and
Right.
then
Well, and
price of price of services and goods go up, you start missing out on profit margins or whatever, and then you gotta lay people off. I mean, it's markets in general, as we've discussed before, is just an up and down battle. And these layoffs, I mean, we're talking tech, and we can continue to talk tech, but also real estate. There's been real estate layoffs, and I was telling you before, investment banking layoffs as well. And I think maybe some of the what's behind that is all the same. I think there was such a well, yeah, we can go into real estate. I mean, look at the housing market. After when COVID happened, the housing market absolutely exploded.
if I could bring on my old DJ partner on here, um, who is in the who is in he is an active he's been a house framer for years. We've talked about this before, and how I mean with the shortage in lumber and what that looked like during the COVID, and then
Yeah, the lumber thing was big.
that drove the price of the market through the roof. That drove the price of building. What was once $175,000, $200,000 house is now a three and a half to $400,000 house, and people were even as in. I mean, I think, and this may have been the start of it too, Travis. I think you hit it on a good point here. Is because of everybody because the rates had stayed so low for so long. I mean, the Fed had to do something, right?
Oh, for
I
sure.
mean, when the Fed said we're going to drop, okay, this has been 3 years, I think, was 3.5 years at three, at least sub four interest rates, and for whatever reason, I mean, and there's definitely brighter heads in the room than mine. I'm just a simple mind, but to look at, you cannot just keep on letting a market skyrocket. We say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you want a market to skyrocket? Because after a while, if you keep on letting people borrow and borrow, and stop me if I'm wrong on this, Travis, but I think if you keep on letting people borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow, you're going to have a market made of money that's not there. It's
Look at 2008,
right.
2007.
That was another dot. The housing, that was a housing crisis. Then,
Anybody could buy a house.
right. And I did buy a house back then. That was during I mean, and what was bad back then was we thought 6.5 was good. Well, you couldn't have told me back then that there was going to be 2.3, 2.2. How? I mean, that's
Yeah.
nuts. And so sure, people are going to take out $300,000 and $400,000 loans because, well, I mean, so you're going to be paying $2 back for every $100 that you borrow. You don't have to think twice about that. But now all of it's come back into its own, and people have seen this. I've seen this. You were in middle school, elementary school when this happened the first time around. You know, and this is in an economic cycle. People believe in this. I mean, you can trace this back as long as there's been a United States and as long as we've kept track of a market. This isn't the first recession that we've had. We've had,
Oh no.
and everybody thinks of the Great Depression. No, that was the. We've had multiple depressions. You know, you know, 1896, people thought the world was going to end because, I mean, of the jobless rate, and that wasn't even close to what it was during the Great Depression. And you're seeing these numbers, and I'm quarterly. Let's see. So we won't have. That's the bad thing about it is we won't have a quarterly unemployment report until like what, March, probably.
I
Uh,
think March. Let me Google the most recent unemployment rate.
I think we're somewhere. We're still in. I mean, it's not a decent. I mean, it's not a terrible. Yeah. So
3.7% on
we're
November
so
2022.
that was no okay. So November. So November. So December, January, February. Yeah, it'll be March before we get the next numbers. It'll be March before we get the next numbers.
I'm
And
really curious to see what that number is, considering like of those numbers and companies I read, and that's just tech. A lot of that was fall and on, fall of last year and on.
hmm
So it was like around the time I did that report is when some of these bigger layoffs were just starting. I'm really curious to see what that new percentage, that new number is.
well, and where people are going to really start being concerned is long term. You know, I hope, and we saw a little bit of this. I knew of some people who did this back in 2008. People who panicked and took the tax penalty and pulled out their 401ks and started,
I know people that did that in 2020.
yeah. And if you start pulling out 401, and these are I've got a 403b. I know guys who have 401ks. I mean, those are meant to be parked for the long haul. You don't mess with them. You let your investor. I've given instructions to my investor to be a very. I shouldn't say very. I'm moderately aggressive with my mutual funds and with my 403b. And I know some guys with their 401ks and what they're, but these guys pulling stuff out. Think about what that's going to do to your market. And people don't, I shouldn't say they don't know. We know. I mean, we have enough of the what's the financial guru, the Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey telling everybody, hey, put back 10% every month into your savings. Have an emergency fund. What kind of emergency fund do you have? And, you know, so what do you think this is going to what is this going to spell out for? What impact is this going just within this sector right now? What impact do you think this is going to be playing out on the rest of the economy?
I mean, I can't see it being, I mean, obviously it's not a positive thing. You got people losing their jobs, right? And I mean, this is, again, this isn't just tech. I mean, like I said, like there's the housing market, you got people in mortgage losing money, you got people in banking losing, not losing money, losing jobs. You got people in banking losing jobs. I mean, on one hand, yeah, it can be negative because it's showing that hey, markets are going down. Interest rates are probably going to keep going up. The Federal Reserve's got to do something about inflation, right? On the other hand, you can look at it as like, okay, well, people are leaving the workforce or leaving that industry, do they go into something like where do they go? Do they just go on unemployment or do they go into something different? Like I know restaurants, the entertainment industry, people like that, they need workers. Blue collar is still hurting for people in pretty much every single trade. Do you see people make career changes and fill the gap in those industries? I don't know. I think you will to an extent, but I don't know. I can't say what people are going to do for sure. I mean, I think if people go into different, if people still find work, I think I really don't know, man.
It's
To be honest,
well, and that there's
I
line.
can't see it being a good thing. Let's put
No,
it that way.
no, and because of what
I
we're
think
gonna
I'm just trying to be optimistic about the situation.
you well that to me is that's it's really hard to be optimistic about this because when you look
Yeah,
at
for
all the
sure.
characteristics that come with a market like this, I mean, let's talk about how aggressive things are. I mean, let's start out here. Let's just make small time predictions. Okay, so small time prediction that I'm going to say is you're going to see more. I mean, this is just the beginning. You're going to see complementary industries because when I say complementary industries, the global economy is so interconnected anymore. It's not even funny. You can trace you can trace one part of the economy. It's like, what do they call that, 7 or 6 degrees of separation, you know, when you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. Well, it's the same thing within the economy. You can make a connection between, you say, well, I don't do any online, or I don't do any .com, or I don't do any of that stuff. Well, wait a minute. In the long term, that's going to come back, and that's going to trickle back to us eventually. You will see different industries. I mean, because when I was reading that article that you sent us about what Google was doing, one of the areas that they cut back on, I saw that one of the department was their one of their, what do they call it, their development and innovation departments.
Hmm.
And I'll just tell you this me as an educator, education, Google is making a large push at what they call the Google Education Workspace, where you can do everything within, from Google Meets to Google Classrooms to Google Docs to Google Forms to Google this. I mean, everything, and a lot of that was developed by some of these research development teams. And I was reading the story that you sent us about the one guy. He was the only in his work group was the only one who survived all the cuts. You know, so for us in the industry, who are involved in tech, I mean, teaching is a tech heavy industry. We are in
Oh, for sure.
we are highly dependent, and I mean, I am I run a Google Classroom. I mean, everything I do is Google based. And a lot of the things that they are doing is, you know, we like to be on the cutting edge. We like to be, I like I mean, just how it's developed. Now, is that going to have an impact on how we're going to see things develop? Who knows? Go larger scale when you talk about Amazon. So Amazon, you said they were one of those who made, what did you say, 8,000? Was that what they,
No, what
that
what did
article
I
you,
say that number was?
I don't, you, in that article said, okay, I can't,
I want to say Amazon laid off 12,000
yeah,
people or
okay.
10,000. It was some number like that.
And so, and think about, and it would be interesting to know in what sector that was in. Is that going to be more on, I mean, surely that's not going to be on distribution side. I would assume that's probably going to be on their website, on their tech side. A lot of these companies, if they can find a way if we can find if they can find a way to be able to.
So Amazon began making layoffs in its devices organization, retail division, and human resources division, cutting 10,000 employees, and announced the comp and January 4th, they announced they plan to lay off more than 18,000 employees between reductions made in November and the ones we're sharing today. They're doing big layoffs right now.
And to me, I mean, Amazon
I
is
mean, they're such a huge company for them. Maybe that's not a lot, but
well,
that's
but
a lot of people losing their jobs.
that's I still. So I mean, we're easily looking at
That's
a
recent.
large percentage of the of dot coms, of techs, of whatever. You know,
They're throwing the Amazon. I'm reading here. They're throwing Amazon under the tech layoffs. So you can go ahead and I guess throw it under that category.
so next to see though, and I kind of got wandered off point. Going back to complementary goods and complementary services,
Hmm.
not to steal a science fiction. I hope Casey Davis, by the way, says she listens to us to help her go to sleep, which kind of I don't know how to take that, but to take from but to take from a science fiction realm, within
That's
science
good.
fiction
I've heard that before.
yeah, within science fiction there's this realm that there's this idea called the symbiont circle. What affects one is going to affect all. You know, and the idea behind the symbiont circle is that part of that concept is there's people who are on, like, if there's going to be a cut here, the people down here on the opposite end are going to be like, well, that's never going to get to us, we don't have to worry. It's it, it but it does. When the stock market crashed October 28th, 1929, in a lot of cities that was below the fold news, that was below the newspaper fold news, because a lot of people weren't connected into the areas that crashed in the stock market. But after a while, when dominoes started to fall and investment money that went into these companies started to fall, and then there was not the demand for goods, and people started being laid off, and then one after the other, after the other, after the other. Are we going to see something like that? I don't think we're going to see something like that. But all of your leading economic indicators right now, and that's the other thing too that's different about this. In an economy, you have leading indicators. So when you look at the leading indicators, that's how the economy is going to go. All right, we're going to need to see this in March. So we're going to need obviously one of the leading indicators is going to be your unemployment numbers. That's going to go one direction, but as you said before, it's going to be really interesting to see what new housing starts are going to look like when this quarterly report comes out. If Because they're still, I mean, I know, talking about my buddy who's the framer, they've got jobs lined out until 2025. So
Yeah.
so I mean,
I'm still skeptical on the housing market as far as what it does this year. I've heard good and bad things. I don't, at the end of the day, it's a market. Nobody truly knows what's going to happen. But you can make cases for both sides of it. But I mean, if he's telling you he's got work lined up, I mean, that's a good sign,
that
right?
is
I
a
mean, I
good
remember,
that's a good
I
sign.
mean, I
But
remember looking back at 2008. My dad was on unemployment a lot. There was nothing going on,
2000
nothing in
so
construction.
2009, that's when my buddy and I, or 2010 was when we started our DJ business together, and we went for almost 8 years. And then when the housing market started picking up there 2019, I mean, he's like, hey, I've got 4 kids at home and I need to work all I can. Go. And my fear is just seeing a lot of this stuff start falling through, you know. But certain aspects of the economy still aren't panning out the way they should. Like I said, because you have a market the market hasn't. I mean, when was the last time the market had a stable you would classify as a bull market month? When would you consider to be the last true saying, okay, hey, we had this was a true bull market month. We saw significant growth in most sectors. I mean, right now,
Uh, everything was, I mean, everything was green. Everything was pretty positive until like the Fed started raising rates. I mean, once the interest rates started to go up, it seemed like things started to drop and come back down to reality. So I would say,
yeah.
for my opinion, it seemed like it was around that time.
Well,
Um,
and I'll tell you what, it was funny. So every year, and we're getting close to it. I'm going to do the I so every year I've done this for about the last 5 years. I do it's called the stock market game. In my when we start talking about the Great Depression and the stock market,
the
I
stock
start
market game.
and it's a and there's tons of different simulations you can get into online now for classes. So I use this one simulator where I can sit. I tell the kids it's like, okay, you have your project. This is their second semester project. I start them out with $10,000 in mock cash, and I say invest this. We and through the process we explain what stocks are, how stocks work, what the market is, factors that drive the market up, factors that drive the market down. And so last year, I remember last year it was in March when we late February when we started this game, and I mean some of these kids, and this is what was scary. We've got some kids at Clopton who are already making pretty good money in jobs and doing kind of like remind me a lot of your brother because when your brother was in school, your brother had so many side jobs it wasn't even funny. And there's a lot of kids like that. And some of these kids just start saying, okay, so what are penny stocks? And then you have to say, okay, slow down, you know. But then, you just,
Go all in.
yeah. But it was, my whole point to that story was this. It was at about that time when this was one of the years where we didn't have usually you have a bunch of kids who will make, and the game runs for 6 weeks. And at the end of 6 weeks, you'll have, I would say it was safe to be said that, and the kids can buy and sell whatever they want as much as they want. And by the end of 6 weeks, at least, I'd say at least 35 to 40% of the kids have made at least, you know, a couple of $1,000s in profit. But this last year it was funny because everybody's like, okay, well, this one's, oh, okay. V, what's a safe one to go with? I was like, okay, go with Apple, go with Disney, go with Walmart, go. And then okay, we're going to, of course, these kids, I was like, don't sink it all into one place. Well, these kids will just like market, just mass sell, but all that didn't work, and I wonder, and I wondered about that. I'm like, okay, how many people in real life are actually doing this exact thing when they panic, when they see numbers I mean, I saw today though that Google share is still, I mean, they're not doing terrible. Their stock isn't terrible, but you
Yeah,
meant
I don't know what it's at right now, but
I just so I have, and so out of that I call it. I'm afraid to. I'll just show it here. This is my, so on my phone here. I don't know with my background. You probably can't see it. You can't see it.
it kind of popped up a minute, but
Yeah. So the thing that I use I use an app called Robinhood, and actually I don't know if it was Sean or you or somebody else who got me into to Robinhood, or who, I think it was Robinhood was behind the whole GameStop and all that
they
jazz.
were the ones that stopped investors from selling when the whole
Yeah.
the
So
short
here, so this is what it
yeah.
look. This is what, but I mean, I call it my. This is my video game. I almost call it. I consider it like a big. So I started doing this 2 years ago, and I started with $20, and at its peak, I got up to, and I don't really. I put stuff in there, and if I like it, I'll keep it in. I got as high as $50. and I, back, but this was back a year and a half ago when it was up that high, and I thought, man, now I need to pull it out, and then but with investing, as long with everything else, people are going to, and I think people are going to look at this, what's happening. I don't want to be the doom merchant, but I think people are going to be looking at what's happening, and I think we're going to start seeing some. I would hope to think, maybe I'm wrong, and you give me your input, Travis. I would like to think that there's going to be a lot more people who are going to maybe start making more careful purchases. Maybe think twice about how they're going to, instead of blowing the money, save it. Sitting back. I mean, where do you see this general trend going towards, with especially with this job market doing what it's doing on the tech side?
I mean, we talked about this when inflation happened. People have a hard time, and to myself including, uh, when you having to save when you, or maybe that's not the right way to put it, making a lifestyle change as far as like, say if you always eat out every weekend, that's your thing. You go out every Saturday and you go get that dinner. Maybe you can't do that every week anymore, and it's got to be every 2 weeks. Or maybe you can't go out, but maybe once a month. A lot of people have a hard time making that lifestyle change, and maybe that's something a lot of people struggle with, and it ends up biting them in the butt. I don't know. Excuse me, but you know what's interesting? I remember back, was this Black Friday or was this Christmas time? Jeff Bezos of all people like came out and was like warning people like, "Hey, I wouldn't overspend this holiday season. I
Oh,
wouldn't be
Jeff
buying all this
Bezos.
stuff."
Yep, I
Yeah, it
remember.
was Jeff Bezos of all people came out and said that. I was like, you would think he would say the opposite, owning Amazon, wanting people to buy.
Well,
Um,
and when you looked at black market this year, some of the numbers that are, and they're starting to release some of those numbers. I saw early stuff. I think it's been like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Some of the early returns,
was it
and they
not good?
no, it was not that good. I mean, to me, it is a reflection because when you looked at Black Friday, they didn't have a lot of stuff to offer.
I would say that deals kind of sucked this
The
year
deals,
too,
the
which
deals, because
doesn't surprise me considering everything that's been going on.
well, because of you can't offer in a capitalistic, in a profit driven society. To me, and I may read this totally wrong, but I'm doing this from a social studies teacher's point of view. If if you've had a good year, if you've had a successful year, and maybe you have the surplus of stock, or maybe you have, I think at Black Friday, I mean, the whole concept of Black Friday is to end the year in the black, not in the red. And so they will make these, and when they show these deals, they're showing these deals probably at just a few dollars over cost, and they're still going to make, they're going to make profit, but they're hoping on making profit based upon the volume that they
The
sell.
volume, correct,
And so,
correct.
because this year economically, because we saw inflationary rates shoot up the way we did, why did we see I mean, when your standard minimum wage will go up $15 to $15 an hour, and it's slowly making its way around Illinois. They started their plan last year. Their plan is by 2025 to have minimum wage at $15 an hour. All right. So as that comes through, what do you, I mean, what do you have to do? You have to raise prices. Enter in your far left, and I again, if you are one of these people who are among the left side, we want you to come onto our show and state your opinion and view on this, or at least jump on the chat box here and let us know. But this is where some of these people will get on there and they will say, well, the rich need to, not go so much for the profit motive anymore, and basically share the wealth. That is a socialistic statement. We are in a capitalistic society. Profit is what drives our economy. People don't like to say it. It was said best in the movie Wall Street back in 1986. Greed is good. People, I mean, that's why they go into business. Why? Because they want to make money. Now, your Alphabet, your Jeff Bezos, your Amazons, your Robin Hoods. What are these guys? Why are they making these cuts? I'll tell you. You know why they're making these cuts. It affects the bottom line. Why? At the end of the day, these guys are still about making profit. And they didn't see what they wanted to see in this last year. So what are they going to do? We're going to cut back employers or employees. We're going to cut back in areas where we think we can, quote unquote, trim the fat. And I don't think it's going to be for the long term, but at the same time,
No, that's not long term.
it's not going to be for the long term, but in the short term, and you mentioned this yourselves. So in the short term, what's going to happen? These people who are in these jobs are going to go look somewhere else. They're going to do what they need to do to find it somewhere else. But for that guy you mentioned, for the guy who was 20 years with Google, and had his retire, what do you do at 20 years? I mean, at 20 years, I've said this about myself many times. And it used to be the case. Now that we're in a teacher shortage, it's not so much the case anymore. But it used to be that I was unhireable because master's degree, 25 years in teaching. You know, when I go somewhere, especially with the pay schedule of some of these schools, if they've got me or they've got the young rook, they're going to take the young rook.
Absolutely. Cheap
Okay.
labor.
Yeah, cheap labor. And it's the same thing with these other companies. Unless they're unionized, and that was, remind me to come back to that, but unless they're unionized, you don't have really a foot to stand on because they're going to go with the younger labor. Whereas in some union markets, they're going to say, look, we're a union shop. We're going to reward experience. We're going to reward, and this is who we want. We want people with experience. We want people with, and I still think that that's the benefit of the union today. I make a lot of people mad when I say that, but when you look at that article that you sent us about Google, there's a union within these tech workers, but they don't have collective bargaining skills, and so as a result, they don't have a voice, and you see these 10,000, these 12,000 cuts like this. I'm, you know, eh, I'm kind of concerned, and I think another thing that we failed to mention that I put an article, I read an article on CNBC this last week that said look for income tax returns to be lower this year.
Yep.
Okay,
You were
well,
you were showing me that right before the show.
yeah, and there's many reasons for that. Okay, again, you know when people say, "Hey, well, we need to tax the rich. We need to tax the rich." Okay, good. Well, that means more money in your pocket. Yes, you want that instant gratification. You want that bigger paycheck. But in the end, there's not as much withholdings, and so what you pay in versus what you're going to get back. You know, that's how your whole tax
And,
return thing works.
and
And
one more thing we didn't really touch on, and I've read it, I've been reading on this. It's been like an off and on thing, but there's no like big articles discussing it. And this is just one sector, but if we're talking supply chain issues, looking at the automotive sector,
oh, geez,
the amount of times I have read that a factory is closing down, opening back up, employees laid off for 3 weeks, then they're back on, then they're laid off for a couple more weeks and back on because of supply chain issues. And I feel like that hasn't really been touched on too much when you're talking about layoffs and stuff.
we talked about that issue last
Well, we,
year.
we talked about that when we were talking about the chip shortage and what that was
Yeah,
doing.
I mean,
But that's still going on. I mean, they just closed down. There's a I want to say I don't know if it's Chrysler or who it was. It's not far from here. They just uh shut them down for almost a week, I think, because they're waiting on material, waiting
is
on
that
stuff.
that plant in Joliet? Is that
I
the
don't know
one?
if it's Juliet or I think there's one in Rockford.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. There is one in Rockford. Yeah, and
I think that's the one I was reading about.
we,
But that's been an
do
off and
you,
on thing with multiple factories I've heard about.
so do you see this as? I'm going to give you my take on this, and we got about 10 minutes left, and I just want to kind of spitball at each other here for a little bit.
All right.
My take on this right now, and I've said this. I've been saying this for 2 years. I've been saying this for when they first started talking around about minimum. When I still remember when Seattle was the first major city in the United States to raise wages to $15 an hour. And when I saw that happen, I said, "This is going to be a problem." And I cleaned out my Facebook closet after that comment because a lot of my liberal friends came to the forefront and said, "Oh, you're just the rich men have got to take their blah blah blah, and they've got to pay their dues, and they people can't afford to live to work on these wages and everything." And I was like, "Get a better job. You don't have to go to college. Go to tech school. Go to something. Get." And you saw what you ended up seeing in then is all the big box stores started doubling down, and they had people, and you saw a lot of your mom and pop businesses who could not compete, and they started shutting down, and a lot of your small town lumber yards around the Seattle area started shutting down. Why? Because they couldn't afford to pay their workers. We saw in Seattle a micro view of what would later pan out to the entire United States. And I told people from the beginning, the rich are not going to take, like I said a while ago, the rich are not going to take their cut. And so what you're seeing the perfect storm brewing right now. And we can mark this as January 23rd, and we can mark the tape and we can see it later on. But I believe right now we're seeing the perfect storm happen. And you mentioned supply chain issues. We're, I mean, Now granted, this whole egg shortage thing is because of an avian disease that
Yeah, the eggs.
egg price, geez, $8 a dozen. Goodness gracious, you know. But you see all these different factors. All it takes, in my opinion, is for one. We're one, maybe two dominoes away from seeing the whole thing just collapse. I, you know, if you see a scale back in the housing market, what's going to happen? If you see a scale back in, when large retail starts reporting on quarterly earnings, what are we going to see? When I don't think we've really gotten any really good true numbers yet because we're still young into this recession. I think once we start seeing some numbers come out that show unemployment's raised, housing starts are down, or crop prices down, we're going to start seeing this trickle down effect, and it's just going to go. We're going to see a full. I don't think we're going to see a depression, but we're going to see a full on recession go through, I would say, most of 2023, if not into 2024. What are your thoughts on that? Or what do you see as your end game on this thing?
Overall, I think it gets worse before it gets better. I don't see us really staying steady just the market in general, not talking anything specific. Just from what I've seen and what I've researched on. And but to go back to um, everything, say if there is a crash, there's always talks of a crash. Everyone always talks about when's the market going to crash. There's always people that say they're going to predict it. And every time we talk about the economy, we always say it. No one knows what's going to happen. And this could all come crumbling down tomorrow. You could wake up tomorrow and the Dow Jones drops 40% or something crazy. It's no reason to panic. Like, don't go selling your 401ks or freaking out or doing anything crazy. Like, just everything's gonna be okay. Relax. Do, housing. it's really hard to say. I think you made a good point. You need to wait for the numbers to come out. You know, the unemployment rates you said to come out in March. I think that's going to be a really good indicator where we're at, especially with all these recent developments just in January alone and like towards the end of last year. I do, you know, what's funny is they continually denied a recession, like the government has, but you just see all these factors adding up, one thing after another, and I don't see how we don't hit a recession, but who knows? I mean, there could be a rebound tomorrow. We could go into a giant boom tomorrow. You just never know. But I don't, like I
I
said,
I
overall,
don't.
I see it getting worse before it gets better. What was the poll question, by the way?
I
Did we
didn't
do a
have
poll?
that. Well, swim dad got too caught up, and I was tired last night. I didn't realize until mid this afternoon. I was like, oh, I didn't put a poll question up, so that was my ballot.
And I
My
wanted to say one more thing. I know I always throw the blue collar thing out there, but you made the point on people complaining about making money or the rich should do this or whatever, and you made the point, get a better job. Let's say your average tech salary. What do you think? And I know tech's such a broad term, but like an average employee in tech, what do you think their salary is? Like 60, 70,000,
I
maybe 80,000? What would
it
your
depends
guess
on.
be?
I would assume somebody in the Google in the tech side on Google or Amazon. I can't see being any less than in the less than 60s. I can't see it being any less than 60s.
So say you get laid off, or say you're just a you work at McDonald's, you work a retail job, and you're saying, I don't make enough money, but it's not my fault. I deserve to get more money. And your argument is, well, get a better job. You can be an electrician, you can be a plumber, you could be a tower technician, you can be any trade. And I know for a fact because I've seen it and I do it. I don't personally make this money yet. But you can make a six-figure salary very easily, not working any crazy overtime. You can have full benefits. You don't have to be smart. I've met some really stupid people that do this job, and I mean really stupid. Most of them, some of them are even under the influence when they work.
Well, with
And
what you guys do, yeah.
you can make a very good salary and have solid benefits. So I can see the arguments on both sides. However, at the same time, I have to say you got to help yourself and really make a change if you want. Do something for yourself. Don't blame others. You know, like go make something of yourself. Do something different. Work for it.
And this is something I hope as we get closer to episode 100 or even being a part of episode 100, I'd like to have Martin Hanley on again because he was he was a treasure trove of information when we had him on. I think we've had
Yeah,
him on.
that was good to get his
We've had him. I
perspective.
believe we've had him on the show twice, if I'm not mistaken. And
We did. Yes.
and the ability to get into these schools is remarkably not as complex as what people would make it out to be. Is there some work to it? Yes,
No.
but
No.
I won't mention names, but one of my son's friends, his mother, Bryson had his birthday this weekend, and his mom, one of his friend's moms, this kid is like a son to me, and he's Bryson's best friend, and she's a single mother, four kids, and she's working. She works in this one job, and she's picked up this other job, and she's like, Andy, she said, I'm going back to school, going to dentistry school. I was like, that is awesome. She said, I don't know how I'm
Oh
going
yeah.
to. She's like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. She said, but it's like 6 year program. She's going to start out doing online stuff, and then she may have to move closer to the college once she gets accepted into the program. But you know, it's people like that in my eyes that when in order to
And it's
survive,
not easy.
no,
It's not
in
easy. That
order
is a hard thing she's trying to do, but
in
she's
in
doing it, and that's
and
awesome.
in this society, in this time, you have to have initiative. in order to survive. And I guarantee you, and I pray that those tech guys, I pray that those Amazon and Google and Robinhood and all those people in all those industries have the initiative that they don't look at this as the end of the road, as it is a changing course to go to a new direction. Because the reason why America, in my opinion, has come through a lot of this stuff is because you have innovative people who take the initiative. Okay, when one door closes, another one is going to open. Okay, where am I going to take this next? You know, I've shared with people a lot about my financial woes and the poor financial decisions I've made throughout my life. Don't live off of a credit card. Don't rely on credit cards. This is talking from a guy. I've still got about 4.5, 5 years left to pay off everything, and I mean I've got it all planned out. Don't look for the shortcut way out. I want to share this one story, and then we can close it out. But this is
All right.
I so this I get stuff all the time because of the amount of debt that I have. I don't have. I'm under 100,000. I'm under 60. I'm under 60,000. But a lot of it is debt that I incurred from making poor choices. So I get this ad from this company accredited by the Better Business Bureau, which is a reputable group who rates businesses. I looked these guys up. Yes, they have an A+ rating, and they labeled themselves as a credit counseling service. Now, someone who's, just like all the rest of you who are going through economic hard times and inflationary and recessionary times, I'm looking at ways to make my buck go further. And I read all of their material through this ad that they sent me, and they said, we can shorten the time and shorten the amount, of interest and everything by getting your debt paid off faster. And I thought, okay, check mark. It's a legitimate business. Check mark. Investigate it. Legitimate business. Check mark. Okay. Look at all the stuff. Look at all the information. Check mark. Okay. Fill out their questionnaire, and then they said, okay, we'll contact you within 24 hours. It was an hour later. Dude calls me up on the phone. I'm with such and such credit recovery service. I said, yeah, I filled out your brochure. I filled out your thing. He said, thank you. And this guy, he told me, he's like, I'm a retiree. This is something I'm doing as a, kind of helping people with their debt and everything. Guy was he wasn't a scammer. He wasn't, these people, it's American based, older guy, gentleman. We just talked shop for 30 minutes. And then I said, okay. I said, give me the tall and the short of this program. And he said, okay. He said, we work with major credit collection agencies, creditors, and we work to negotiate, lower payment. I was like, you're speaking my language. Go on. And he goes on, he explains the program, we'll cut, your time of we'll get you, he said, I can get you into a 2, a 4, or 5 year program. I said, I'll pay the most I can. And I said, put me in the 2-year program. And I was like, okay. And I said, before we go any further, I said, explain to me exactly how this works. He said, well, the first thing we needed, and he started out really nice. He said, the first thing you need to do is stop using your credit. I said, done. No problem. And again, sounds legitimate. And then I said, well, I have a line of credit from my bank. Do I need to change? He said, no. He said, just don't use it. I was like, okay. And he said, and we don't want you to pay them for the first. And I was like, what? He said, don't pay them. I was like, oh, you're going to negotiate. He's like, we don't start negotiating until your bank or your whatever reports you missing payments. Are you following me?
Mm-hmm.
And so these guys, and you basically pay into your own, I don't know if you want to call it your own, I don't think escrow is the right word I want to say, but an account, and then they pay your creditors out of that account. But it's only after they report you delinquent on your payments, then they negotiate. Then they negotiate the payment plan, and then they get you. And I was like, thank you for your time. And I hung up. I said, send me your information via email, and I'll talk to my wife about it. He said, it'll affect your credit rating just for a short, 5-6 months. He said, but then, you get everything. I'm like, no, So, in times like these, my whole point to this story is this: there are there's people who are, I'm not going to say predatory. And this guy was very cool about it. He wasn't high pressure at all. He just said, I get it. I understand. He said, if you ever change your mind, here's and the guy was cool. It's like, have a nice day. Never heard from him again. And, but the guy was, and you have to ask questions. And so that's why, and that kind of goes along with what Travis was saying, don't sell your 401k. Don't, take take the initiative and find there's another door that's going to be open somewhere else. So anyway, that was my story.
Oh, thanks for sharing it.
Yeah. I don't know if that had anything to do with anything, but I was that was something that happened to me this week. And I thought, man, I'm going to find me an easy, no, set your budget.
It's not all doom and gloom, folks. The world's still a good place.
Yes.
Don't let the news fool you.
Yes.
Be happy.
Yes, it
Big
is.
ass this week.
That is. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. Shout out to our buddy Sean. He will hopefully be back with us next week. We hope to hear from you. Be a friend, share with a friend. We are on as many podcast services to our friends overseas. Again, I reach out to our biggest overseas market in Germany.
Cool.
Our listenership, according to Spotify, is growing in Germany. I don't know what we're saying or if it translates, but definitely reach out to us. We're glad that you're joining us. Share with a friend. Maybe next week, if I get brave enough and ask my Alexa to play the right stuff, it'll show how you can play the podcast on there. But until that time, we love you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.